you don't want to be in one, I always ask sort of ask. Yeah, no, please, feel free. I'm glad you asked that question because it gave me a chance to point out I like to take pictures as well.
Yeah, so when we get down to Atwater, so I wonder if the States has been open. Yeah, it's another one of those Michigan bucks. Yeah.
It was closed.
Of course, here on your just ahead of us is the Joe Louis fist. That fist was donated to the city of Detroit in 1986.
I'm gonna try to take names now.
I am. I want to make sure that
okay.
I don't want us to get hit.
Oh, no. I thought you were trying to.
I thought you were asking.
No. We don't. I was watching.
Yeah, the fist was donated by Sports Illustrated to the city of Detroit in 1986. It's the idea about the fist was not to project Black power in any sort of way like that, but it was to recognize Joe Louis, the great heavyweight champ, the first, not the first African American champ, but the longest reigning African American heavyweight boxer. Again, donated to the city in 1986.
So, if you turn right here on Mandela, Atwater, we can get closer to the statue that we've got out here. And it's been closed at times too, but I think it's open now. Yeah.
No,
Sorry.
you good, baby.
I got
you
it.
good. No, you good. I
You
can
are.
see.
Okay.
I can see.
Okay.
No, you good.
So of course we're on Atwater. The street has, in recent years, been named. This part of it has been named after Nelson Mandela, the South African freedom fighter and the first democratically elected president of South Africa. So a lot of people don't see the street sign often, but this strip of Atwater is now called Nelson Mandela Boulevard. Yeah. They renamed it, it's probably been about 5 or 6 years ago now.
Okay, so see if you can pull over here behind that white car.
And this one, right here.
Yep.
We've reached, or close to reaching, our first site, the Gateway to Freedom statue. And it tells the story of the Underground Railroad, the system of routes by which African American slaves from southern states, by hook or crook, found their way to Detroit, sometimes on land, sometimes by steamboat. But this portion of the city in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s was really the riverfront. Some of what you see on the Riverwalk is infill land, and so that's why this street, I talked about it being called Nelson Mandela. Now, traditionally it's been called Atwater because this is where the riverfront was. The riverfront is here, but the water started at pretty much where Atwater is today. I know that some of you may not want to get off the bus. I can tell you it is probably about 1,000 feet. That doesn't sound like a lot, and it's not a lot. But the Gateway to Freedom statue is at Hart Plaza, and the only way to get there, the fastest way to get there, is to walk through, where the Detroit Princess is, Steamboat. And again, it's about 1,000 feet. So if you aren't interested in making that walk, I certainly understand. Was where Hart Plaza is, and if you know downtown, you know the tunnel area. That's where Mariners Church is today. It moved in 1955, but it used to sit right in the center of where Hart Plaza is, where the water sculpture is. We're going to take a little bit of a walk. The walk is only as far as. Gateway to Freedom statue. It was commissioned by the city of Detroit in the year 2001. And what was symbolic about 2001, if y'all remember, that's the year the city celebrated its 300th birthday. And so at the time, the mayor was Dennis Archer, and the city and Detroit government worked with the foundation community, the private sector, to raise money to commission the Gateway of Freedom to be created and then obviously erected. And so now it's amazing because I was a younger reporter at the time. I remember covering the Detroit 300 events. Does anybody remember that? 2001, we celebrated. We celebrated the city's birthday. Stevie Wonder did a concert here at Hart Plaza. That was in 2001. But again, this symbolizes and symbolic of the Underground Railroad, that system of routes that moved African Americans mainly from the South to Detroit. And as I pointed out, Hart Plaza, that's obviously just over our shoulder, or just over my shoulder, was the original home of Mariners Church. Mariners Church was a major stop along the Underground Railroad, as was Second Baptist Church. And we know Second Baptist Church as the oldest black church in Michigan. Both of those churches, Mariners and Second Baptist, were very key in operating the Underground Railroad. An individual that was really one of the conductors, if you will, the Underground Railroad, is the gentleman here that's pointing toward Canada. His name was George the Baptiste. The Baptiste was an African American business owner in Detroit in the 1850s and 60s. He was one of what we call a conductor of the Underground Railroad. He was a wealthy man. He operated a steamboat called the T. Whitney. The T. Whitney. He owned that steamboat. It wasn't quite as big as the Detroit Princess, but what the T. Whitney did was move people from Detroit's waterfront to Canada to ultimate freedom. For those of you who remember in our history books, Canada eradicated slavery much earlier than we did. As early as 1833, Canada was a free country. And so in the 1840s and 50s, it was advantageous for somebody from an African American from Kentucky or from the Carolinas to get to Detroit, which was a free, which was part of the Union. Michigan was part of the Union, and it was a free state. But at times, they did have slavery here in Detroit, something that a lot of people don't know. But certainly by the 1850s, that had been long gone, and people like the Baptiste helped slaves get to freedom. And so it depicts, what's being depicted here is the Baptiste pointing toward the south to Windsor, Ontario, with escaped slaves, even young people, women, children, all escaping the harsh chattel slavery of the American South. And so we're pleased and blessed and honored to have the Gateway to Freedom here. It's a popular tourist destination when people come to Detroit. I usually try to have a stop here at all of my tours. It gives us a point at which to talk about the city's history, particularly as it relates to African Americans and other people of color. One final note about the statue. It was designed by a black man. Ed Dwight is the sculptor that put together the Gateway to Freedom. And interestingly enough, and I know a lot of us haven't been to Canada a lot since the pandemic, but there is a companion statue on the other side of the water in Windsor. I never knew about it when I was covering the unveiling of this statue. I'm a marathon runner, and I was running the Detroit Free Press Marathon one year and said, hey, the statue that I'm running up against when I was over in Canada looks a lot like the one in Detroit. And learned, obviously, that Ed Dwight actually sculpted, created, designed both of them. So the next time you're in Windsor on Riverside Drive, there's a companion statue. It's not directly parallel. It's closer to where that's old Channel 9. You see that television, the tall television and radio antenna? It's in that general area. So the next time you are over there, take a look at it. But I wanted you to see the Gateway to Freedom. Is it close? So the other interesting thing about what you see, the names on the bricks, these were contributors. Unfortunately, we've had some vandalism for elements. Yeah, with rain. But these are families and individuals that Pobo Arena is not an arena anymore. It's more part of the convention center with ballrooms and the like. And of course, the city demolished Joe Louis Arena a couple of years ago, and there's a high rise going up. You see that crane, those cranes.
Got the best.
Yeah, we got right. What's really kind of cool about the Riverwalk now, starting I think in about a couple of months, you'll be able to walk, ride your bike or scooter from bridge to bridge, from the Ambassador Bridge to the Belle Isle Bridge. They're getting ready to open up the last strip of the Riverwalk. I think probably right in time for summer. Yeah. And of course, the Gordie Howe Bridge is a little bit further down. So I guess I can't say bridge to bridge.
And his students, the story I was told when I started here was that his students, they got a group of them to go around and paint the bus.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tyree Guy, I didn't know Tyree Guyton's students did the artwork.
Yeah.
Okay, very
Yeah.
good. Learn something new every day.
Keep on living.
All right, absolutely. Okay, so we're going to take, I'm going to go to Lafayette Park. So, can you get up Civic Center? Or do we have to go? You know, a lot of times these streets, you should be able to get, and then we'll be up by Huntington Place.
You change it, know in a minute, won't
I know they're changing it every 2 years. Have to keep up. So yeah, I wanted you to see the Underground Railroad last stop. Really important in Detroit's story. Detroit, of course, was founded in 1701.
Oh, is this parking?
That's when. Can you get up there?
Nope, this parking.
Oh boy.
That ain't what we want to
That
do.
ain't what we wanna do.
Nah. Yeah, these are all parking.
You used to be able to do that.
That's all right.
Yes, ma'am. Oh, yes, absolutely. Thank you for reminding me. Founded in 1701, we've come to know more about the origin of this land that we're on today. In fact, there were Native Americans or indigenous people here when the French got here. And so a lot of us, particularly those who are researchers and history writers.
I'm sorry, I couldn't even hear you. I'm
Okay.
trying to record.
Okay, all right.
Can you go back?
Sure. Sure. You know, they used to have a microphone here too.
They do, but you have to request it
Got
for it to
it.
be
Okay,
used.
gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. I got to use my outside voice.
Use your outside.
All right. So the French settlers got here in this portion of the state and region in 1701. A gentleman named Cadillac. Of course, we know Cadillac as the name of an automobile company or automobile company. Part of the GM General Motors network. But Cadillac and others, so let's go back to where you came in.
We're going to Lafayette Park.
Yeah. We're going to take things back up to Jefferson.
Okay, I got you.
Okay, yeah. But Cadillac and others found indigenous people here and some Africans as well. In fact, we've done research in recent decades that suggests that there were Africans, people who look like me, here as early as the 1700s, as early as 1763, as a matter of fact. And so a lot of us point out that 1701 does have meaning, but there's more to the story.
I'm gonna look in here, Kim, when we get up there and see if they maybe accidentally left a mic in here.
That's okay. I can talk loud.
Sure.
But if they can't, I can talk loud. I usually move around. Okay. I usually move around quite a bit so I can get closer to them so they can hear.
So they can hear me.
Yeah. Let's give Lisa another hand, y'all.
Hey!
All
We're
right.
gonna get through. We're gonna get through this.
Making it happen. African Americans in the city, but just not African Americans. A lot of us have heard about Black Bottom and its connection with the African American community. But if you were in the neighborhood where we're going, if you were there at the turn of the century, the turn of the 1800s turning into the 1900s, it really looked like a United Nations in the sense that there were Eastern European immigrants in that community, there were blacks in that community, there were browns in that community. We'll talk a lot about, when we get there, we'll talk a lot about the African American influence of Black Bottom, and we will be there in just a couple months. As I pointed out, I'm a newspaper reporter, also an author. One of the books that I've co-authored is the book called 1967. It is a book that chronicles the civil unrest in 1967. One of the authors of the book, and I'll have a couple trivia questions because I'd like to give 2 of the books away today. So put your thinking caps on. I usually ask a question based on what I've talked about on the tour. So you got a test coming up. All right.
And when we make that left,
Okay.
we're gonna go just north of Larned. So how long have you been driving for the trip?
A year. I worked for 10 years in West Milwaukee. I was a school bus driver there for 10 years. And then just quit. Just got up one day and said, that's it.
Here we go. Yeah, Andy's pretty cool. I've done probably about 10
years ago, it was known as Black Bottom. And certainly by the 1930s and 40s, this neighborhood was predominantly African American. The whites that I mentioned earlier moved to other parts of the city or other parts of the region. The reason why I wanted you to see the Fannie Richards home site to your immediate right is Fannie Richards holds the distinction of being the first African American teacher with the Detroit Public Schools. Fannie, the first African American teacher with the Detroit Public Schools. She was a private school teacher when she moved here to Detroit. She was an active member of Second Baptist Church. You remember I talked about Second Baptist Church earlier being the first African American church in the state. Richards operated a private school at Second Baptist. She later sued, she and others sued the state of Michigan, arguing that Detroit Public Schools was practicing racial discrimination. In fact, African Americans couldn't attend the Detroit Public Schools in the 1860s, up until 1869, when the first African Americans were enrolled. Richards and others. How many people know the street Bagley in Detroit? Well, Bagley is named after a man named John Bagley. And John Bagley was a school board member. He also ended up becoming mayor. I think he was governor too. He ran for governor. But John Bagley and Fannie Richards and others sued the Detroit Public Schools and won. The Michigan Supreme Court ruled that the Detroit Public Schools indeed were carrying out race discrimination. And so after that race discrimination was struck down by the state high court, Fannie Richards joined Detroit Public Schools and, as I pointed out, became the first African American school teacher. I wanted you to see her home site.
Could we get out?
Yes. And if this is an opportunity, a lot of times people take selfies. Oh, yes, another great story. The question is, why did they call the community Black Bottom? I pointed out that it wasn't an exclusive black community. Black Bottom actually gets its name from the French settlers that I talked about here as the early 1700s. The community is known as Black Bottom because of its dark soil. The soil. Most of this community in the 1700s was farmland. And of course, being close to the river, farming and ag business was pretty plentiful. And so the community is not known as Black Bottom because of African Americans, but rather the black soil, fertile soil that was used a lot for ag business. Okay, we're going past 1300 Lafayette. Where that truck is. Let's see if we got some room to put in front of it. Usually that spot is over there.
It's okay. This is the last stop.
Yeah. This historical marker is what I'm trying to get to. To your immediate left, of course, is Chrysler Elementary School. Chrysler Elementary School opened in 1961. It is largely considered one of the finest academic schools for kindergarten through 5th grade. Now it has a preschool element. When my wife and I and son lived in Lafayette Park, my son Jackson was a student at Chrysler. What's unique about it, as many of you know, it only has one classroom per grade. It has, I think, 6 classrooms in the entire school. It's certainly one of the smallest schools the DPSCD has, and it attracts students really from all over the region, the city and the region. Jackson went to school with kids that lived in East English Village and Southfield and the like. I think a lot of parents like it, particularly those who live in the downtown area. It's easy to drop your kid off at school and pick he or she up. But Chrysler Elementary School, of course, is named after Walter Chrysler, of one of the founders of Chrysler Corporation. I wanted to stop story, and we thought it was important that school-age children and others, Chrysler Elementary School children and others, know that story of Black Bottom. So we were able to commission the marker itself. Cost about $3,000 to pay for and have a Michigan historical marker erected. It has to be approved by a commission, the Michigan Historical Commission, but they were all too ready and eager to help us make the Black Bottom marker happen. And so when you're in this neighborhood and people refer to it as Lafayette Park or Elmwood Park, you can certainly tell them the story of Black Bottom and people like Fannie Richards. Talking about Black Bottom and Fannie Richards, I'd be remiss if we didn't drive by Second Baptist Church, and that'll be our next stop. Although we don't have time today to do the tour, the tour is handled, the Second Baptist Church tour is handled independently by church staff, so they have to be scheduled in line with their schedule. But we'll at least get to see the church. I know many of you have probably seen it before, but I'll share some information that maybe some of you did not know or just forgot. Yes. So the question, it is the church with the Underground Railroad, and it has the tour, their personal tour that I talked about. You get a chance to see where slaves were kept until they were able to escape. And the church's basement, actually right under the sanctuary, is where the holding room, if you will, or setup room for the Underground Railroad were. As I pointed out, Second Baptist Church was one of the main final stops along the Underground Railroad. But other churches had similar programs going on, like I talked about Mariners Church on the riverfront. Sir. No. It's a great question. But Mariners Church did have a tunnel, that from its holding room did have a tunnel that went directly to the river. So kind of where we were at the Gateway to Freedom statue. Because as I pointed out, old Mariners was kind of where the boat went, the water sprinkler, like water sprinkler. The water, yeah. The church was basically there, so there was a couple hundred feet of a tunnel that led exactly right at the riverfront, so people could get on George the Baptist and Key Whitney, or maybe take smaller boats over to winter. As most of y'all know, the water, the Detroit River has a pretty robust current. You can't swim that thing. You'd be ill-advised to take any type of small boat. But people got over any way they could. Not everybody got over on a steamship. Some people were smuggled in cargo boats. Lots of ways to get there. It's about a mile. Yeah, go ahead.
Isn't they brown?
Yeah. It probably is. I mean, if more people probably did that than you would know. Cargo boats that would be smuggling, goods. People would be sometimes in a, and I'm talking about more like a wooden box, if you will, not necessarily cargo box like you see today. But there were various ways people made the journey, but they did make the journey. Of course, we're in the community known as Greektown now, and of course that is the home of Second Baptist Church. What's interesting about Second Baptist is the street, the church is on a street called Monroe. Of course you know. The first pastor of Second Baptist Church in 1836 was a person by the name of William Monroe. And so I usually get this question after I say William Monroe, and somebody says, somebody will ask the question, was the street named after him, the first pastor of Second Baptist Church? It was not. Back in those days, there were no secondary renamings for black people as streets go. This street is called Monroe after the President James
right.
Monroe.
You want me to?
Okay, if you can.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
I can.
Yeah, thank you. And so, to your immediate left is Second Baptist Church, founded in 1836 by 13 African Americans. As I pointed out, Second Baptist Church is the oldest black congregation in Michigan. At that time, Michigan wasn't even a state in 1836. Rather, it was a territory. And so what they had to do, the 13 African Americans had to file paperwork with the territorial territorial government requesting permission to start a church. That's how the territory laws operated at the time. And of course, they were granted the opportunity to start Second Baptist. What you see now is not the original church. This is the second church building. The first was really almost around the block. The first church site. This church has a facade on it. That's a brick facade. Really, the original church looks more like, or the original design of the church is like this sandstone, not sandstone. I think that's sandstone. Stucco. Yeah, right. The entire church had that exterior look. The bricks were added in a renovation about 70 or 80 years ago. The church continues to operate today. Fine young brother, 37-year-old pastor, Lawrence Rogers, pastors the church today. I've had the pleasure of speaking at the church on a couple different occasions. It is still a very strong congregation. And I've always wondered, how in the world do people go to church in downtown Detroit, in Greektown, when you got so much stuff going on? Now known as Lafayette Park.
Like the Lafayette Park.
Yeah, so we can take this across the service drive, maybe across the freeway, and make the left.
Yeah.
The church operates a bookstore. A lot of African American titles there. It usually is open most days, but the bookstore is renowned in the sense that it's one of the few churches in Detroit, larger churches, that have bookstores, and they have a lot of books about the church's history, in addition to the city of Detroit in general. Lawrence Rogers is the pastor. He's pretty young. He's not even from Detroit. He's young. Reverend Turman was pastor at Second Baptist about 35 or 40 years. Reverend Turman retired, and the church did a national search and selected Reverend Rogers. Young guy, relatively young. You know, he's married. I think he has a couple children. But a good guy. So Lisa, what we're going to do is go to Rivard, but we're going to make a left on Rivard and go north.
And go this. Okay.
Yeah.
It's like what, the first street?
It's the the first one.
Okay,
The
gotcha.
green light is there. I know a lot of you have heard conversation about I-375 and ideas about whether to keep it as a thoroughfare. Those conversations are ongoing. When I-375 was built in the late 1950s, it wiped out a very popular business strip, African American business strip, and this street was called Hastings. Hastings, of course, doesn't exist anymore because the Chrysler Freeway is here, I-375. There is one small strip of Hastings that still exists today, and it's up by Grand Boulevard. But Hastings ran from the riverfront up to that North End area, but it was wiped out by city leaders, and at that time, Black Bottom was almost exclusively black, and so it caused a lot of disruption and displacement of African Americans who lived in this city or lived in this part of the city. And so now there's a conversation going on about what to do with I-375 to make it a business thoroughfare like Woodward. Do we provide some level of reparation to African Americans who were displaced? Or descendants of people who were displaced. All those conversations are happening now in the Elmwood Park, in the Lafayette Park, and the Elmwood Park community. I think there was a question. The construction started in 1959. The freeway opened in July of 1964. So it took about 5 years to build. From Jefferson up to what today is the Fisher Freeway, essentially where Eastern Market is today. Okay, so we'll make a right turn here, Lisa.
All right.
And we'll follow Antietam around it. Of course, it cooks. Lots of new development going on in Lafayette Park. You can see apartments and condominiums. This community is turning is being gentrified very rapidly. By the 1980s and 90s, it was almost exclusively black. There are lots of young whites now that are moving into Detroit in buildings like the Pavilion, 1300 Lafayette, and of course the world famous Vanderrohe homes, the townhouses, just to our right. Lisa, what we get up to?
Bumpy ride, y'all. Sorry.
Yeah. You're doing a great job.
Okay.
Lisa's doing a great job, y'all, right? All right. A couple of years ago, we opened a self-guided walking tour where you can learn more about Black Bottom. If you have a cell phone today and can scan a QR code, a smartphone, by going to one of these kiosks, I'll walk up to it now, you'll be able to hear people who actually lived in this community, and they'll tell the story of their families while they were living here. There are about 6 stations just like that one. And again, with the smartphone, if you just walk up to it, scan the QR code, you'll be able to hear it on your phone. I'm going to walk over there really quickly because I like to take pictures of it to market the work. And you're more than welcome to join me. It'll be just a few minutes.
Okay.
So this again is the Black Bottom community. I'm going to show you one of the leading schools in Black Bottom in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. How many people remember or have heard of Miller High School or middle school? Yeah, of course. We're going to see that site. It is not Miller anymore, but it is. The structure's still there, and it's a great story to tell. So, Lisa, we're going to travel along Antietam.
Okay.
And-
You've been saying it all wrong. Antietam, Antietam.
No, I know.
Saying it all.
I do it all too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So how
Oh, so more information about the tours. So, there are a couple different ways this works. I do tours, I lead tours independently, and I'm offering you a parting gift, and it'll have my information, cell phone number, website, and the life in that bag. But I've been hired by the school district to do tours just like this. We do some of them on Saturdays, so young people can go on the tour too. We've done some of them on weekdays. So I would say if you're interested in more tours, certainly in your conference bag, you've got the main telephone number to the division, the Parent and Family Engagement Division, and I've been hired as a consultant to lead tours. So that's the best way.
Straight ahead.
Yep. Straight across.
Gotcha.
This
Orleans.
bridge. Orleans. Yep.
Across the bridge.
Yep. And and what we do on the tours, and I think they're generally announced through the website, the EPSC website, but you can certainly reach me in person. Again, I'm going to give you a card at the end of the tour. My cell phone number, for those who just want to take it down now, is 313-551-1304.
Sorry, y'all.
Okay,
Look tight in there.
What we're going to do is flip back around so when they get back to them, we can catch it.
Okay.
I used to live here, so I used to cheat a lot of times.
Okay.
I would recommend the bus.
I'm a little too big.
Yeah.
I'm a big girl, Ken.
Yeah.
I can't squeeze to them little
Yeah,
spots.
I used to, my son, when he was little, used to say, Daddy, you're breaking the law. He used to live here. Ken Coleman is my name. Telephone number, area code 313-551, we'll turn right here.
All right.
551-1304. We are still, technically, a lot of people look at this community as where we are now as Black Bottom as well. It depends on who you talk to. The lines of the border of Black Bottom differ depending on who you talk to. We know the area now as Elmwood Park. And up until about 6 months ago, I lived here. What you see to your immediate left is Old Miller High School. Miller opened in 1919 when this community was still largely white and had a lot of European immigrants. It became more African American over the decades, and so by the 1930s and 40s, this was predominantly a black school. It started out as a middle school, as a matter of fact, and because the Detroit Public Schools didn't want black kids from the Black Bottom area going to school with white kids, they converted Miller, at that time it was called intermediate school, they converted it to a high school. And so beginning in 1933, it was known as Miller High School and not Miller Intermediate School. Lots of famous people attended the school. When Joe Louis moved here from Alabama, he attended Miller. Coleman Young, the city's first African American mayor, attended school at Miller for a couple of years. So did a lot of jazz legends, including Milt Jackson, the great vibraphonist, Kenny Burrell, the great guitarist. Boy, so many names. Actress Della Reese attended Miller as well. You remember her, depending on your age, Harlem Nights, Touched by an Angel. and if you go way back, she had a variety show in the 1960s. It is now operated by a charter school operator. We closed Miller in 2007. I say we because I was working for Detroit Public Schools at the time in community relations. It broke a lot of hearts when we closed the school. It had been suffering from declining enrollment, and y'all might remember
We closed 35 schools one year, 2006, 2007. It broke a lot of hearts. I remember working in community relations. I would actually staff a lot of the meetings that the superintendent, at that time was Ken Burnley, had with community leaders, and just people going in and out of Dr. Burnley's office crying because we had made a decision to close schools in their neighborhood. And Miller was a really strong alumni. In fact, every second Sunday in August, they have a major picnic here. RVs come from all over the country, and what they do now, the charter school allows them to park onto the main lawn here, and people get here as early as Thursday and Friday for that Sunday alumni picnic. It attracts people that attended Miller in the 30s and 40s. Of course, many of you know Miller went back to being a junior high school in 1956. So everybody who attended Miller after 1956 went here for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, sometimes 9th grade some years. So it is back open, but it's open as a charter school. University Prep, one of University Prep schools.
What is the high school?
No, the high school is not too far away from us. No, University Prep now has about 6 or 7 schools.
I used to work at the middle one.
Okay.
The one that's connected to the science center.
Yep. My kid did 6th through 8 there. So it closed in 2007. It laid vacant for about 2 or 3 years, and then the University Prep people opened it. I've walked in there. I've seen the school before and after. They've done a lot of great work to make the school strong again. Interesting story about Miller. As I pointed out, it started out as a junior high school or intermediate school. The all-white school board, all white men at that time, decided that they didn't want black kids going to Eastern High. Certainly didn't want them to go to Cass, although some did. Northeastern was still had some whites. But when they switched the school over, made it a high school, you have to remember it was built for kids who were younger. And so the interesting story about Miller in the 1950s, and if you've ever been in the building, it does not have a high school size regulation gymnasium. It was built for middle school kids. And so the boys who played basketball at Miller didn't even have a gym, a regulation size gym to have home games. They didn't have home games at Miller. They went to the Brewster Recreation Center. They played games at other places. But despite the fact that they did not have a regulation size basketball court, the Miller High School, the Miller Boys High School basketball team won 4 consecutive city championships. They made lemonade out of the proverbial lemons, and it had a very strong program, both in in track, football, and basketball. You certainly can't do a trip or tour of Black Bottom without knowing the story of Miller School, so I wanted you to see it. Unfortunately, guys, before congregations rose out of Second Baptist Church, and they're on the east side and the west side. I had the same experience. Hartford Memorial Church. Yep, absolutely. Yep. Lots of churches. Many congregations that have come out of Second Baptist. Our long-serving pastor, Charles Hill, was an assistant at Second Baptist. I think we're noted as being, if not the first church on the city's west side, city's first black church on the west side, certainly. Hartford has a distinction of they went 100 years with only 2 people leading. Reverend Hill, of course, Reverend Allen. Now it's Reverend Allen's son is leading the church now. 100 years, just 2 pastors. There's a marker here on the
remember that's the old Duffield site. It's now Ralph Bunche School, but there is a Michigan historical marker there that tells the story of the black soldiers who fought in the Civil War. And there's a Michigan historical marker there because that used to be called Camp Ward, that plot of land. And imagine coming out of slavery and volunteering to fight in the Civil War. That's what a lot of African American men did who lived in the city. Many of them are buried in Elmwood Park. So the next time you're at Elmwood Park, you can check it out. It's a plot, small plot, but it has the burial markers of dozens of black men who were buried there, who served in the Civil War, many of them who had been slaves. They do, yes, they do it every. They did it. They did it in November. They do it every year. Now there have been, as you can imagine, November the 11th sometimes is a very inclement day, and sometimes I've seen some really warm days. But there's a sister, and her name escapes me, but she for the last 40 years or so has led that every morning every morning Veterans Day. They have a ceremony. And a reenactment too. The African American men in the Civil War Guard. Great question. I'm glad you made. Great question. Glad you raised it. Yeah. Two trivia questions. So put on your thinking caps. Kind of remember some of the names and sites that we've seen. The first person that raises their hand will win a copy of Detroit 67. Question number one. Who was the gentleman who owned the steamboat T. Whitney? Did you say? You are correct, sir. You have a copy. A copy of your book. Copy of my book. George the Baptist. All right. I should have done the Jeopardy thing. You got to say it right. Who is? Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right. I've got another book and another question. So let me think. Who was the first African American school teacher in Detroit?
Ready?
Okay, honor system. We're also going to have to do a tiebreaker question for the four people who answer the question. You're in the playoffs now. You're in the finals. Can you name the first pastor of Second Baptist Church? It's only for the four people who answer the question. First pastor of Second Baptist Church. Who was Monroe Street named after? Well, but that was the last. I had another question. Yeah, but it's, remember now, the first Monroe, she answered the first Monroe question late. But what is the street, who is the street Monroe named after?
Bless you.
President. Why? I was doing it for the fifth. All right. She said Monroe. She said Pastor.